So I'm going to show you how to take the print that you made and make a print with it. So I have the matrix here, which is basically the name of the stamp that you're going to use to create the prints. And you can see I've already done a few test prints on it. I suggest that you do test prints, and every time you do a print, kind of look and see, okay, what printed well, what didn't print well, and make adjustments. So one thing I'm noticing is that in this area, I may not have gotten deep enough with my tool. So I can take the tool and kind of dig in a little bit more into those spaces, and it might print better on the second go. So once I look at the print and go, okay, I think I got everything that I wanted to. Looks like it's got little pieces of this stuff stuck to it. Then it's going to be the task to print it. So, as you can see, anything that I carved is white on here. And then anything that was black is black on there. So that's part of the reason why I had you outline everything with the black Sharpie, is so that you'd kind of get an idea of what your print was going to look like. Now, I have a few other things here. I have a brayer, and I also have a few pieces of paper, and I've got some ink. Now, I'm doing this on a lunch tray. I like to do my printing on a surface that's nice and smooth. At home, I usually use a glass palette, but here at school, this lunch tray works really nicely. If you don't have a lunch tray, you could probably use, in fact, I know you can use parchment paper, works really well. So what I'm going to do is I am going to talk really quickly about the differences between these two prints. So traditionally, when you are printing, and one thing you might notice is the fish is facing a different way than this fish. Remember, you turn it over and you get a mirror of the original design. Now, these were both done in two different methods. Traditionally, when you print make, you take your paper and you set it on top, right? You line it up, and then you put it through a roller or brayer, and you take your brayer and you roll over top of it, and you peel it up, right? So kind of like the opposite of a stamp. However, these are small enough that you could technically take them and push them down on the paper and make a stamp. Let me point out the differences, though. So this was the method where the paper went on top of the matrix, right? And you can see it caught all of the detail, and it looks very close to the original print. This one, on the other hand, is one where I put the stamp on top of the paper and stamped it down. One thing you'll notice is that there's some uneven pressure, which resulted in kind of squishing in that ink onto the page. So I lost a lot of detail because I was pushing on the back of the rubber rather than pushing on the back of the paper. All right. So it's up to you what you want to do on this. But one thing I am going to do is show you how to do a print. So I am going to use the traditional method. That's what I would like you to use in class. And this is going to involve getting a little bit of ink onto the lunch tray. And then getting your brayer. So this is called a brayer. It's just a little rubber roller thingy, and it's kind of squishy. What you're going to do is when you are picking up ink, you want to pick up the brayer. You don't want to go like this because you're only going to coat one side. So you want to pick up the brayer, you want to go in back and forth. And what this is going to do is create like a little square of ink. That's ideal because that little square of ink is going to spread out the ink evenly on the brayer. And then with a light hand, you should be able to go over the entire surface with the ink. And you don't want to push down because then you'll get a whole bunch of ink into all those crevices. Now the tricky part is lining up your print, your paper. So what I tend to do is I will usually kind of look at it from the side, gauge where I want it to be, and then plop it down, right? Some people have different methods, but that's what I like to do. Now with a clean brayer, you can go over the surface. You could also use a stiff card. Anything that is flat will be really good at getting the whole surface to have even pressure. You don't want your paper to move around, so be careful of that. And then once you've gotten everything, you usually can actually see the ink through the paper depending on what you're printing on. And then you can lift it up. Now, mine's a little bit light. I probably should have put a tiny bit more pressure on it. But as you can see, I have a nice replica of my print there. In printmaking, the ideal way to make prints is to try to replicate the process so that you get the exact same image every time. Now, with a beginner, you may not be able to do that. As a beginner, you may not be able to do that, but you can certainly try. So I'm going to, once again, line up my paper, put it down, and this time I'm going to put a little bit more pressure on it. And that's a much better print, although I did still miss part of it. Now, one thing you're probably noticing is that I'm getting a lot of little splotches from the outside of the print. Now I can easily go in with a tool and carve up those areas, but traditionally with block printing, if you have a lot of area like this, it's not totally smooth and flat, you will get a little tiny bit of marks and things around it, especially if I don't have any kind of border to keep it from pushing down in these spaces every time I go across. So what I can do, I can leave it that way. It's this little square. I could cut it into a shape. So I could do maybe like a curved shape. Or I could actually cut around the fish and just have the fish here. And I think that's probably what I'd like to do, is just have the fish. And then later on, if I wanted to, I could even use it for other things, like maybe working on clay to create a little fish texture on clay. So it's up to you what you want to do. I'm going to go ahead and cut out with any pair of scissors. You could even use a hobby knife around that fish so that I just have the fish remaining, and then I'll do prints with those. So one thing is I'm using water-soluble ink. It's going to be very important that you keep your space clean while you're working, but then after you're done, that you go and take this to the sink and you rinse off your brayer. You do not want to have it sitting with ink on it for long, so you don't want to put any ink on your brayer until you're totally ready to start printing. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this off now since I'm done printing, and I'm going to clean off my matrix as well. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed.